Hello everyone from the Novedge team. Welcome to today's webinar, New Rendering with KeyShot 7. This webinar will review and demonstrate a handful of new features available in KeyShot 7, which allow users to create high-fidelity renderings and animations. Today's webinar presenter, Will Gibbons, is the KeyShot Global Training Specialist. Since working at Luxion, he's educated students and design groups ranging from small business to Fortune 100 companies. He's been using KeyShot since 2010. Let me tell you now a little bit about Novedge. Novedge is one of the largest online stores for design software, and we offer a huge assortment of software solutions for every designer's needs. So come visit us at novedge.com. And this is, as you can see, is a KeyShot product page. And if you want more news and information about promotions and new releases, just check us out on Facebook, Google+, or Twitter. Coming up next week, why upgrade to Vectorworks Spotlight 2018? Last but not least, today's webinar is free and is being recorded live. And if you want to rewatch this or any webinar episode on our collection, just head on over to Novedge's YouTube or Vimeo channels. And now I'll pass the screen to Will, and so he can show you firsthand. Take it away, Will.
Excellent. Thank you for the nice introduction. I want to verify real quick that everybody is seeing a KeyShot screen. And I guess unless I hear any complaints, I will assume that we are good to go there. As mentioned, I am the on-site training specialist for KeyShot, which means I go and work with teams. If either you or your teams ever want formal customized training on site, that's exactly what we do. And I'm sure we can work to suit your needs anytime. But today, we're going to be taking a look at KeyShot 7, as you all know. And I, among many other people, have been having a lot of fun with KeyShot 7. And today we're going to walk through a lot of the features. We're going to take a look at features in KeyShot HD as well as KeyShot Pro, and give you an idea of kind of what its capabilities are. And then I'm going to try to make sure I highlight how it changed from KeyShot 6 to KeyShot 7 and really focus on some of those changes after doing a light introduction to the program as a whole. So the first thing that you will see if you have KeyShot installed on your machine is this welcome screen. And we've updated this to include some helpful items such as news. So this learning tab is going to show you the latest webinar that we have produced as well as our manual. And it's also got some what's new items, which is going to allow you to learn about what changed and learn how to use those new features in KeyShot 7. So this will be changing with new content as it becomes available. And then we have our regular benchmark scenes that we've shipped with KeyShot for quite a long time. Then as you use the program, your recent files will stack up here. And then down across the bottom, we have links that help you connect with us in different places. And I have to say that the forum, as well as our blog, are great places to go to learn a little bit more about the program and ask other seasoned users how to achieve certain results. So this is our new little welcome screen that's actually quite helpful. I'm going to dismiss that right now and talk about the user interface. So it's got a very simple, sleek, minimalist user interface. And what you'll notice in the top left-hand corner is actually one of the first new features I'm going to introduce, and this is called Workspaces. So when you hover over the tool, you get a small little tooltip that explains what a workspace is, and this allows us to create different configurations of our user interface. When I click on it, we see a few options. And if I click any of these options, it will change. So if I choose the default, we're going to see the default KeyShot user interface. And this is the one I'm going to be using today. But I will mention there are plenty more that ship with KeyShot, such as animation or advanced. And again, the idea here is to put as many tools up in front and center of you to make your KeyShot user interface exactly the way you would like it. Of course, we also allow you to fully build and customize these on your own and move these from machine to machine. So there's a lot of fun things we can do there. And of course, if we want to use a dark theme or a light theme, at any time we can change those as well. I will also mention that given today's time constraints, I don't have time to show you how to do everything today. I just want to share some of it with you. If there's more interest, of course, KeyShot has a YouTube channel as well where we produce lots of tutorial content as well. So moving on from our workspaces, I want to move on over to this drop-down menu and explain something that's very helpful here. KeyShot is a progressive real-time CPU-based render engine. That sounds really complicated, but it's not. All it means is that when we start working with a piece of geometry, like a model, it begins rendering, and it will continue to render until you tell it to stop. And CPU-based means we're using your computer's processor, not the graphics card. So you don't need big fancy graphics cards to run KeyShot, which is why it works so great on small laptops all the way up to big workstations. So with this drop-down menu, what we can do is we can reduce the amount of our CPU that's being used by KeyShot. So if we reduce it just by a small amount, we are leaving some extra processing power for the background processes within the computer. So I recommend to do that. As we look across here, one of the big changes we also see in KeyShot 7 is that we have text underneath all these icons. We noticed that there were quite a few of them, so we wanted to help people out who maybe weren't familiar with all these icons. But furthermore, we can now customize these. So with a right click here, we can see that I can turn off or turn on text, which is really nice. I can also turn on or off different tools as necessary. So for instance, if I have a 3-button mouse, I'm not going to need things like dolly or pan or tumble. And again, depending on what type of a computer you're using or what type of task you're going to perform, you may or may not need some of those icons. And I also like that if you're working on a laptop, we can go through and start minimizing these items. So our icons take up less space, and it kind of cleans up our user interface. One final thing on user interface customization I do want to call out is that we have the ability to now tear out tabs, which means we can take a certain element of our user interface and we can, Murphy's Law would have it that KeyShot has decided to shut down. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch KeyShot, and we'll just pick up right where we left off there. Alrighty. So as I was saying, we have our different tabs that we can essentially remove, and then we can restore them as necessary. So again, just this idea of customizability is really something that we decided we wanted to give our users with KeyShot 7. So that's pretty fun, and that's available to all users, including KeyShot HD. And I'm going to try to call it out because there are different levels of KeyShot packages. So the you can kind of see a whole breakdown of those different versions on our website as well. But of course, now you guys came to see some action. So I'm going to import a model, and then we're going to talk about moving through KeyShot and how we use it to create renderings. So the first thing we do is get some import options, and I'm going to just verify that these look good since this is a fresh installation of KeyShot. So I want to make sure any defaults are set up properly. And in my case, I'm going to turn off that item and turn on these other two items. And I want to draw attention to this item here called import NURBS data. For those of you who have access to or who will buy KeyShot Pro, you can take advantage of this feature that allows you to do something called retessellation. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we do need to use this checkbox if we're going to retessellate our geometry at some point. So now I'll hit import, and of course KeyShot turns our CAD data into tessellated geometry. Very cool. So the first thing you'll notice is this is indeed a bowling ball with some bowling pins. And what I'm going to do is begin with looking at our collection of materials and applying a few basic materials here. So if you're new to KeyShot, what we have here on the left is this library, and we have a library of materials, we have a library of colors, of textures, environments, and backplates. Now on the right-hand side, we have a project panel, and this allows us to navigate through things like our scene tree, which shows our geometry. We also have here material settings. So if I click on a material, we'll see that the material properties there. We have our environment settings as well as lighting, our camera settings, and some image editing options. So again, we'll walk through all this, but we're going to begin with finding some materials. And I also want to point out that there are a lot of new materials in KeyShot 7, meaning not only did we introduce some new material types, our entire library of materials on the left-hand side here got rebuilt for KeyShot 7. And they got rebuilt in the sense that they are now all unit aware. And there are a lot of materials here that contain textures, and those textures have been scaled accordingly and appropriately. So if you maybe found that in some previous experiences, if we found something like, I don't know, a wood texture, and we were to take this and apply it, in some cases the wood texture would be either too large or too small, but now they're all scaled according to real world units, which is really handy and just helps speed up your workflow through KeyShot. So I'm going to find, using the search option, some metallic paint, and we have some nice kind of candy coat materials here I might want to take advantage of. And then I'm going to use just a white paint for these bowling pins here. And of course, the one other thing I'd like to do that I tend to make a habit of doing is going to my environment settings and finding a studio environment to use instead of our startup environment. A little key insight here for anyone who's new to rendering is that oftentimes the materials appear the way they do because of the lighting in your scene. So if we have a very neutral and kind of gray environment, it lacks the contrast to create some nice highlights and reflections. So by using a different studio environment, we'll notice that we have right away some better looking materials with those highlights and reflections as well. So moving back to the materials tab, I'd like to talk about a couple other new materials here. There's a nice little trick for working in KeyShot. If we don't want to see our background reflected, we can hit C on the keyboard, and that places a solid white color background. And this tends to just clean up our viewport and give us a studio kind of view. And of course, that color could be changed to anything we would like. If I wanted to go into background and change it to a light gray, so those bowling pins pop out, that's looking pretty good there. All right, so I do want to draw attention to one of our new materials here, and that is a cloudy plastic. Now, we recently had a contest, and let's see if I have some examples up here. If we look in the KeyShot gallery, this is one killer example of one of the recent winning entries from our cloudy plastics material competition. So you can see this clear plastic just looks really nice. And if you're ever interested to see what KeyShot's capable of, if you go to our keyshot.com/gallery, you can see all sorts of KeyShot 7 renderings there. But anyway, this new cloudy plastic material is definitely a versatile and nice material. And what I'd like to do is find it. And so if I go to the plastic, expand that, go to cloudy, expand that, and then find the shiny folder, we can find some shiny cloudy plastics. If I apply this to the bowling pins, you'll see they become cloudy plastic, this kind of green color. And they're a bit darker than you would expect because these are pretty large objects. They're about 1.5 feet tall. And this cloudy plastic material is made for pretty thin walled materials, kind of like a plastic injection molded part. We do that so it works very well right out of the box. But of course, we need to scale this up in accordance with the scale of these objects. So if I type in 100 here, you will see now that these become much less saturated in color. And the cloudiness, if we want, we could reduce that, and then they'll become more transparent. But what's cool about this material is where the object is thicker, you have more cloudiness and more of an opaque color as a result. And of course, we can go the other direction and make them very cloudy. And of course, this will give you a lot more of an opaque-like material. And once this reses up, this will look nice and smooth, and all that little noise inside there will go away, and you'll be left with a nice kind of resin, almost translucent-like material, because this is a volumetric scattering material, and it's a really flexible and exciting new material. We've got advanced options for it, but again, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep pushing forward. I just want to show you that this new material exists. And another one that I would like to show you here is if I were to change this material to a, let's see, a metal material. Of course, we can make this chrome by making it a white polished metal, which people do quite frequently. But I do want to show you something. If I were to put this background back to white, one of the first things that you might notice is that we're at risk of having too much contrast and our whites just blowing out. So you can see on the top left, these almost become abstract because we can't see where the edge of this model is. It's just too bright and shiny because it's reflecting the white background. Well, we've got something pretty exciting here, and that is an enhanced metal material. When I double click on the metal bowling pin, we see that it has color options or a color mode, and we can actually turn that into a measured material. Now notice when I click this, we'll see that they turn to gold, and that's because in our measured material types, we have a bunch of presets that are measured metals. So we have some scientifically accurate complex IOR data that is determining the actual color of these materials. But if I change this to an aluminum, we'll notice that we can reduce some of the obscene or overly aggressive white reflections. And what's cool now is we can use this anodized checkbox. And if I start to make some adjustments here, we can see that we can actually play with an anodized coating, giving you a ton of control over materials and metals specifically, more so than we've ever had in the past, of course. So lots of really cool stuff here in this new kind of enhanced version of our metal material. So those are two big new material types I did want to point out to you, but of course we've got some more things to discuss. And before I forget about it, I'm going to take a second to call out something else that we have, which is plugins. So a lot of you are using different CAD applications or 3D modeling programs, and you need to get your data inside or into KeyShot. And we want to make this as easy as possible for you guys. So if you head on over to keyshot.com/plugins, you'll end up on this page here. And it's got a bunch of plugins. Some are developed by us, some are developed by third parties. But once you install these, you get a small button within your 3D package. And when you click that button, you can send your data right over to KeyShot, and it makes it nice and easy. All right, so what else do we have here? The main reason I wanted to use a bowling ball scene here because because we have a lot of interesting challenges when it comes to placing labels onto these parts. So with a kind of a rectilinear or flat rectangular type object, placing a label is not so difficult. However, it can be a challenge with a very curvature, continuous, sort of organic form like this. And so what I want to do is take a moment to draw attention to the improved texture mapping that is in KeyShot. So if I hide everything except for one of these bowling pins, there's a little hotkey called Alt left click, and that should hide everything except for this one bowling pin. And I can set my camera target to this bowling pin. Perfect. So of course, what if I was tasked with placing a KeyShot logo on the very top and center of this bowling pin? That could potentially be a bit of a challenge with the way we used to do it. If I move on over to my textures tab and I find a logo, a KeyShot logo, and I drag it onto my bowling pin, I'm going to do this and add it as a label, you'll notice some pretty big differences here. And what's awesome is we have now this orange outline, this box. This bounding box is going to tell you right away how large this label is and help you locate this if it doesn't appear where you expect it to when you place it on your geometry. It also has this nice little up arrow that keeps us pointed in the up direction of the label. And as I drag it across the object, you can see it actually stays glued to the surface, and it really does a great job just mapping automatically. Well, we also have the ability to scale this texture in the real-time window instead of going over to our material properties. And what's better is if I even hold the Alt key, I can actually center scale this which is just again, a really nice way to keep a label in place, but adjust its size. So what we're going to do here is find out, again, as I mentioned, how to get this directly on top of this. So the first thing I'm going to actually do is I want to adjust my coordinates to, I'm actually gonna make this centered on part. And you'll see that my texture or my label jumps out of view. But of course, if I click my bowling pin, it comes right back on there. And now, instead of centering this on the model, we're looking at this individual part's X, Y, Z coordinates, and that is the basis of how it's being projected. So if I drag this just around somewhere close to the top of the bowling pin, get it fairly close, I'm going to go ahead and hit the green checkbox. And now we notice it's projecting too far into the bowling pin. All I need to go down here, all I need to do is go down to the depth slider and set this to an appropriate value. So right now, if it's projecting from the top of the bowling pin, it's projecting 50 millimeters down. I think about 10 is maybe a little more appropriate, maybe 12. And we see we're looking pretty good, but I think my label is also a little bit big, so I'm going to scale it down a bit. As I scale it down, it comes in view. Okay, now I just need to make sure it's truly centered on the top instead of off-centered. The nice thing is there's a great little way to do this. I'm going to look at the detailed coordinates of this projection and find that we have center X, Y, and Z. If I zero out the two values that are already close to 0, we will be centering it on two axes, which is exactly what we want to do. The center Y, we leave this where it's at because this is the number, the distance this label is from the very center of this bowling pin. So by doing that, we have absolutely, with 100% confidence, gotten this centered on top of this bowling pin, which is great. But what's really exciting is if I right click and show all the rest of the parts that I hid earlier, you'll actually notice that the same label is now instanced onto every other remaining bowling pin. So with a fraction of the work, I placed this on 10 other pieces of geometry in exactly the place I wanted to. And the reason this works so well is because it's using the center on part mode. And since all of these bowling pins have the same linked material applied to them, they receive the same treatment as the first one. And so what we could do, of course, is apply labels very quickly, or graphics or logos to objects that are in different, different sort of layouts or orientations. And this will respect their local axes, which is great. So that's one really fun item. Of course, there's a lot of things we've done with texture mapping. I don't have time to cover all of them, but one more thing I can show you that's pretty exciting is, if this is the center on part mode, what do we get out of centering on model? Well, I could take a different logo and apply it to one of the bowling pins, and I can scale this on up nice and big. And I'm going to project it from, let's check so I want to project it from the Z axis, from the back of these bowling pins. So I'll hit Z. We'll notice that it moves it. So I'm going to rotate this guy into the right direction, scale it on up. And I'm just going to move it down and over, scale it up just a little bit more. And we just need to flip this over. So I'll go into flip vertical. And if I take my camera and I adjust the perspective so we don't have a lot of distortion here from our camera's angle, we'll see that it's taking the single label and it's projecting it through and across multiple pieces of geometry. So the new center on model and new center on part modes makes it a really quick, easy task when it comes time to positioning labels, whether it's on multiple pieces of geometry or single pieces of geometry. We give you the flexibility to do that, of course. Because this only takes a moment, I'll show you one more neat option. If I add this label and I want this applied maybe onto the surface of my bowling pin, if we wanted to wrap this around the edge, we can go into change it from a mapping type of planar to cylindrical. And if we hit move texture, we see that it's wrapping it around in a strange way. So I'm going to use my fit to option and fit it to the y-axis because I know that this bowling pin was modeled in a y-up package. And of course I want this centered on the part, so I'll click center on part. And now it is scaled up very large. So the last thing I'm going to do is just scale this on down. And this is now not only scaling it proportionally to fit on the object, but it's automatically detecting the circumference of the bowling pin at the widest part, and that's adjusting the diameter from which this label is projected onto the part, keeping it looking correctly. So lots of fun stuff there, but texture mapping is one thing that we definitely enhanced a lot for KeyShot 7. I would also like us to take a look at environments. That's the next exciting thing. So hopefully you guys can keep up. Hopefully I'm not going too quickly, but again, we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to click on the environment tab here. We saw this earlier when I changed the background color. Of course, that is one thing we can do within our environment tab. But if I go to our environment library, we see a big collection of different environments. So we have interior environments, and between versions of KeyShot, we tend to update our library. So here's a whole bunch of new environments, such as we have, show that environment. So we have things like bathroom, we've got options for a hallway, we've got an office, a different office hallway, and you can see that each time I change out the environment, the way these materials and objects look changes. Again, lighting has a very big impact on your materials and how well they read and how nice they look. So we have a ton of great indoor and outdoor HDRIs for different use cases. And of course we have our favorite studios as well. And what we did with studios, which is really exciting, is we rebuilt our classic studio environments using a procedural method, and we'll get into that in just a moment here. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's take a look at some of these new HDRIs. And once we are looking in here, we can see our bowling pins are now in kind of a loading bay. And what we can do here, of course, is start to customize this HDRI. So we don't need to leave this as is, we can start making changes to it. And you'll notice I actually have a list here of environments. I'm going to add another one of this into my list. So I'm not making changes to the original one here. So I'm just going to make a new version of this. And if I decide that I want some different extra light, I can add some light using the HDRI Editor. So historically, we had an HDRI Editor that when you opened it, it opened in a separate window, kind of like this, and you had a bunch of different options. And while that worked, we found a smoother, more streamlined method to build it into our environment tab, which is pretty awesome. It really speeds things up. So once I'm inside here, I'm going to go ahead and add a pin, or perhaps I want to set a highlight on a particular location. So let's say I want to highlight right on my bowling pin here. If I click the add highlight, we get a box that says control or command in this case, and left mouse button is going to add a highlight to the object. So I'm going to go ahead and hold command and left click, and we see we get a light spot right on that bowling pin where I clicked. So I'll hit done, and of course we can then see that that pin has been added to our list of pins. And if we go into the color options, we can increase the brightness and really get that metallic paint to pop. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating this to show you the effects. We don't want to blow out these very white objects next to it. So we want to be mindful of how we light our objects. However, I wanted to show you that it's very easy to add pins. Now, if I wanted to change the location of that pin, I can always go ahead and just click the same button, and we've got our pin. It's currently selected. If I click and drag in real time, I can actually move this pin onto anything else I want. So it will point onto anything. So rather than having to just understand where we're adding pins in our preview to the right, we can work off the real-time view and do that, which is fun. Of course, you can always use the preview as well if you want to. All right, I'm gonna hit done, and it goes without saying, but within KeyShot, you can customize almost anything you would like. Of course, that goes, you know, to, or that it works with lights, it works with materials and all sorts. So again, in the interest of time, I'm not gonna take you through everything you can customize, but know that it's a very flexible workflow. I will add a additional pin, something called a gradient pin, which is brand new for KeyShot 7. And before I forget, I'm going to mention that the HDRI Editor that we're looking at, that is a pro feature. I'm sorry I didn't call that out earlier. But the actual collection of HDRIs that we have in our library, those are not a pro feature. Everybody has access to those. Now, I've added this gradient pin, but I also want to point out that when we're looking at the properties of it, we can see that it's got a interesting little bar down here. And what this does is this allows us to customize this gradient. So right now I have across the top, I've got something called opacity stops. So I can make it completely opaque. So we fade from red to blue, but I can also reduce the opacity. So I can fade from really nothing to blue, or we can get even more advanced and add stops like additional color stops. So I can have different, you know, I can basically build a whole rainbow if I want, or any other item I want, and I can continuously add opacity and color stops independent of one another. And each one of these stops has their own properties, like brightness and all these other exciting items. So fun stuff there. Again, really, if you can imagine building some sort of light object, you can create it in KeyShot. I could convert this to a rectangular pin at any time. I could cut it in half to do a half pin. And of course, those half pins are great for doing reflections on displays. If you want a sharp reflection that fades out, it's really common on things like tablets and monitors and windows and things. But anyway, we can continuously work through here. We can add image pins, all sorts of items, and we can go crazy. But I want to move on to something else, and I want to show you that right now what we can do is actually change our background independent of these pins, which are our lights, which is really cool. In case anyone's wondering why the background is all blurry right now, it's just because while we're working in editing an HDRI, it is in edit mode, which is kind of this low res preview. So I can hit this refresh button and it generates the high resolution version of this HDRI. So that's just to keep the speed and workflow nice and smooth when working in KeyShot. Now, as mentioned before though, background mode. When I click on the background, we see that it's an image, it's an HDZ, which is our KeyShot proprietary HDRI file extension. And we see that the button next to image is blue. If I change this to sun and sky, what we'll notice is our background now resembles the HDRI of a sun and sky. And in the real-time view, another enhancement we added for 7 is that you can click on the sun and actually drag it to change the time of day and really fine-tune the lighting that you're going to use on your objects. I'm going to click on this other pin, reduce the brightness a bit because it's making everything look really, really white. And if I go back to that background and I change it from sun and sky to gradient, just like we had a solid, just like we can have a solid color, we can have a gradient. And this is, again, fully editable and happening on its own layer behind our pins or our lights. And just like we have a gradient, we have a color mode too, which is just a solid field of color. And again, this is the HDRI. For anyone who's new to image-based lighting, an HDRI, this is actually the thing that is supplying us with lighting in our scene. So we have other methods to create a background, but for now, this HDRI is actually just responsible for our highlights and our reflections and things like that. So you noticed earlier when I was changing my background mode, these pins stayed put, so we can continuously create different variations, and we can say duplicate the environment we're working with, and then start making a different option, you know, turning things on or off, modifying them. And it's just a great way to work and start building up different environments. I will say that when you're happy with an environment, we can save it to our library, or we can export. Now, if you're using an image with a background like this that is a copyright protected image, when you go to export, your options are going to be to save it as an HDZ. So this has to stay within KeyShot. However, if we change our background to something like color or gradient or sun and sky, we are no longer using an image. That means our environment is not image-based. It is now considered to be procedural. Procedural is just a fancy word for essentially being very, very editable and customizable, and it's actually generated within KeyShot. So it's not an image file, it's a procedural file. And the perk of, or one of the benefits of working with a procedural environment, actually there's many, but the first one that comes to mind is the resolution. While you're stuck at the resolution of whatever this image was shot at 3K, that tells us it's 3,000 pixels wide, that's the size of this HDRI. But if I go ahead and switch it to gradient, we see that there's a resolution option, and we can up-res this or down-res it to suit our needs, giving us on the fly increased resolution. It's really nice. But once we're satisfied with this, we can export this procedural HDRI, and we notice that we now have 3 options: HDR, EXR, and HDZ. This gives us the ability to do whatever we want with this HDRI, and you can open it in other programs or use it in KeyShot as you wish. I also want to finally mention that with procedural environments, and this is probably my favorite feature of procedural environments, is that they save to the KeyShot BIP file. So the project file that you work on, they're saved within there, meaning you don't need to manage this in the library of environments like you used to with an image-based environment. So if somebody else opens your KeyShot BIP file, this procedural environment or any one that you create will be contained within it, and it does not increase the file size dramatically. It adds a very, very tiny increase in your file size. So major benefits to working with procedural environments. All right, I also want to get into some more features now that you're keenly aware of 2 major improvements in how things work in KeyShot 7, and that is texture mapping and environments. But of course, we didn't stop there. There's plenty more. And what I'm going to show you next is going to be pretty heavy into the pro features, but I want to mention something called Studios in a little bit. Actually, there's a few items we'll talk about before we get into Studios. So right here, we have our bowling pins, and we've got a very simple paint material on them with a couple of labels. But let's say we wanted to see these in 3 different options or 3 different colors, and that is a very common request within design studios. They want to see options or different versions of the same item. We can, of course, turn this into what's called a MultiMaterial, and it gives us another list, which is great because we can populate this list with different materials or variations of the same material. Let's go ahead and make sure our environment is, again, something with enough contrast to allow us to really see our bowling pins nice and easily. Pardon me. Now, if I go to the, let's go ahead and make one adjustment here. I'm going to take care of a scaling item real quick. Going to reduce the size of this environment just by a bit. It's a little bit larger than is necessary. This is just going to help clean up my shadows on the ground. All right, and of course, let's go into our material settings here. And let's say instead of paint, we want, instead of white paint, we want something a little bit different. So we can change the color of our paint, but we can also make a new variation of the same material. So I actually went ahead and did a duplicate and link materials, and I noticed what happened when I did that is one of the labels I had on here, that one that projects all the way through, it decided it wanted to show up. So I'm going to remove that. I don't want to use that one anymore. But now we have essentially two of the same materials. And if I want to change the color on one, that's absolutely something I can do. I can go to my color library and just drag on a different color. And of course, I can name this one beige. And if this other one is kind of a gray, I can call that gray. And let's do one more variation. And let's make this one like a light blue. Call it blue. And let's actually rename our multi-material to bowling pins. And so now we have a material called bowling pins. I'll put an MM so I know it's a multi-material. And we have different color variants underneath it. Now it doesn't stop there. We could also take any other materials that we have. So let's say I wanted an anodized metal. I could take one of those and I could apply it. Now, if I don't want all of my labels to disappear, I have to hold Command, and there we go. And if we want something totally different, if I want, say, a marble, I could just grab a marble material and sorry about that. I can go ahead and apply those, and we can change all those at once. So I actually stepped back a couple of times and I lost that multi-material. So I guess the one word of caution is when you're building your multi-materials, if you don't want to see them disappear, go ahead and don't convert it back to a single material. Now, this is just the first sort of step in creating the studios I mentioned that we were going to get to. The other item that we're going to do is take a look at model sets, because model sets, like multi-materials and environments and cameras, those are the different ingredients for our studios. So with model sets, we can create different variations. So I could actually take this model set and I could create a new one and call it bowling ball only. And I can choose whether or not I want these to link between model sets. And when I look at this gives me the option to clone certain pieces of geometry from the current model set into the new one. So if I deselect everything and just turn on the bowling ball, then in my new model set, I will have just a bowling ball. And we can go back and forth between these two. And if I want to move this bowling ball, I can use one of our exciting new hotkeys by doing Control D, D as in dog, and then I can, whatever object I'm hovered over, when I hit that keyboard shortcut, the move tool will become initiated or active. And we'll notice that I can actually turn on both of these scene sets, or I'm sorry, model sets at the exact same time. And our geometry can coexist, so we can have different versions of the exact same item. And whether or not we linked these materials will give us the option to make one or another a different material. So there's a lot of fun stuff we can do with that. And using our model sets, we can start to build variations of the same scene or the same part or geometry, and it's got quite a few powerful implications. We already talked about having a list of environments that will come in handy when we build our studios. And the last thing that we have to look at is cameras. Now, cameras did not see a major change between KeyShot 6 and KeyShot 7. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and pass this up. But cameras, you add a new camera, you can change the view, and then we go ahead and save that camera. And if we add another camera, save the view, we can go back and forth between these cameras. So that's the basic idea of cameras, and of course we can make lots of adjustments to them. Now, as mentioned, I have a different KeyShot file that I'm going to open up real quick, and the reason for this is to really show off the power of studios and how they can help you build a fantastic presentation in our presentation mode. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and if I go ahead and open up my other KeyShot file that's ready to go, we have a device we're all quite familiar with. And what we've got is, just to explain the setup here, is we have a few different model sets. So if I double click on this model set, we can see there's the standard smaller size of this phone. If I double click on this one, we see the big version of this phone. And we also have a few multi-materials as mentioned. So when I double click on the material on the back of this phone, we see that we get our list and our multi-materials, and we see there's a bunch of different options: gray, gold, silver, black. And when I use Shift B on the keyboard, I can cycle through any of these options in real time. So we can get real-time feedback on how all of these might look, which is just really cool. And this, of course, applies to any multi-material. So if I have another multi-material on the edge of this phone for the antenna, again, I double click on it. Now I can cycle through it. We can see it changing in real time. So that's again one of the really cool features here. When I go ahead and let's see, I'm going to go in here and make sure I'm unlock my camera, and I'm going to enter what's called presentation mode to show you the full flexibility of Studios. And that is, if I click on, oh, not the configurator. So if I go into my layout, summary, and then presentation mode, we can see that in full screen mode, I am now viewing this model or this phone. I can view it from any angle. It's rendering in real time. And I can also show the different studios that I pre-built. And each of these studios are going to allow us to see different color variants on this phone. So what this is doing is it's looking at all the different items that we connected in a studio, and it's cycling through all of those. And if anyone wanted to override this, let's say they were going to customize a product, you can go ahead and give them control to go ahead and change individual colors on the fly of really anything. And they're not just limited to colors, of course, these are materials as well. So lots of fun stuff we can do with this. And I will mention real quick, I'll give you a preview here. This can be set up to work on touch-friendly displays, which is awesome. So I click touch friendly in this wizard that helps us set up those configurations, and I hit next, and then we'll go into presentation mode. We're going to see a different kind of a layout. We've got studios on the left-hand side. We have different models, so we can change the model of the phone. We can change different components here, the colors, and we can just go wild with that. And it's a great presentation tool. So I really like kind of what Studios and our configurator has done for KeyShot 7. And there's lots of different use cases. It just really depends on how you or your team might use it. So if I bring up our studios with the hotkey U, we can see this is the thing I didn't quite show you, but this is the kind of behind the scenes. These are the studios that I built, and when I click on those, we see our predetermined configurations as far as colors go. So when you're in a studio, you have an option to choose a camera, an environment, a model set, and a multi-material, and you can just configure or customize each of these as needed. So again, maximum flexibility. When we go to actually do our final renderings, we can actually go to our render queue, and we can add all of those studios. I'll turn a few of them off just to save time, but if I hit add, we'll see that it's going to add a few of these. Now, another thing we've done to improve KeyShot 7 is give you warnings or more contextual questions. So like, hey, this says you've not saved your camera in its current position. So what do you want to do? Do you want to reset it, or do you want to render? I'll just hit reset, and it's going to go back to where it was. And it's actually adding all of these into our studios, or I'm sorry, our render queue, so we can process this queue and get going. There's a ton of items I would love to share with you. Unfortunately, there's not time for everything, but a few other features I will call out is video maps. We can add textures of videos and animations. We can, like I said, we could retessellate geometry. We can make the mesh, you know, finer or coarser. What else do we have? We have in our render output, we have lots of layers and passes. People work with different methods in Photoshop to build up their images and make some edits in post-processing, and we give them more tools to do this. So again, KeyShot 7 is all about flexibility, efficiency, customizing your workflow, and just improving the quality of life when you are actually using KeyShot. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I see that we've got about 10 more minutes. I want to leave enough time for some Q&A and enough time to wrap this up. But those of you who sat through this, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, let me know. And at this point, I'm going to leave it up to you,
Yes.
Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. So let's start at the beginning. Aldo is asking, is rendering distributed using CUDA core along with the CPU or GPU?
No, we do not use any of the GPU to do rendering. So no CUDA cores will be taken advantage of, just CPU. So number of cores and number of threads as well.
Okay. And next question is, when I purchase, if I purchase KeyShot 7, do I have to pay extra for the SolidWorks plugin?
Good question. So actually plugins are all free. There is one exception. It is a very premium plugin that is not developed by us, and I sometimes forget which one. I hope I do not forget which one it is. If I were to refer to this, it is going to be, I don't know if it's, yeah, I don't want to say the wrong one. One of them, sorry. One of them is a paid plugin, but SolidWorks is absolutely free. Good question.
Okay. Is KeyShot suitable for exterior architectural views?
Yes, so what I would recommend is taking a look at our gallery as mentioned. What's in here is going to be just whatever we have chosen to share. There have been quite a few of, interior posts lately. As far as exterior goes, you may have to look a little bit longer to find those, but we definitely have those. Here's one example, beautiful example by Hussein. And there are many, many more, but KeyShot has come quite a long way recently as far as interior, exterior architectural rendering goes. So great question. Okay.
Next, can I export object ID with render elements, type match, shadow?
Maybe it's the way the question was worded. I'm not sure if I know the answer to that question. So as far as exports go, I can say this much. We can export your data as an OBJ, which is a pretty simple piece of geometry, an FBX or an STL. So STL is going to be used for 3D printing usually. And FBX is something that is new for KeyShot. And when you export FBX, it's going to include things like some material information, mostly things like textures and colors. And I believe we can export cameras as well, but not animations from KeyShot.
Thanks. Is there an option for exploded view or section view?
Yeah, so right now, exploded views are going to be created manually. So that's the not so exciting answer to that question. The good news is they're quite easy to create. So if I were to just hover over a part and hit my hotkey for move, I can grab a part and move it out. And then I can do the same thing for the part below that and move it out and continue this process. And in no time, we can have ourselves a nice exploded view. And what I like, generally speaking, what I like to do with this is if I go ahead and open my animation timeline and I actually move these apart as parts of an animation, then we can, of course, animate it exploding and coming back together, things like that. Now, as far as section views, I will say it is actively being worked on. We have a prototype, but I can't say as to when it's going to be available, but we know it's in high demand and we are finishing up that feature and hope to make it available to you guys soon.
Thanks. Well, I assigned you a question if you should have received because it's quite long and
okay.
It's from a product design studio, and they are very interested in animation, and I think they're hungry for more. So I don't know if you can suggest some other webinars they can consult, or do you see the question that I'm talking about?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So they're wondering in regards to animation types, turntable style, which we support, object exploding out of product, combination of products exploding, and or turntables, X-ray view. So we have an X-ray material that will help with that. As far as the animations, we can do quite a few animations, but those are manual. There's no automatic button for that, but they're very simple, and we have quite a few animation webinars that I have performed in the past that are still relevant to KeyShot 7. So definitely check those out. Those are going to be at youtube.com/KeyShot3D. And definitely, if anyone wants to follow up, my email is will@luxion.com. I can answer more technical questions offline, and I'm more than happy to. And I think
Well, that's
I think
wonderful.
that helps this. Yeah, hopefully
Yeah,
that answers these questions.
yeah, I think it does. Great. So that's it for now. And that was wonderful, Will. You're getting great feedback. Everybody's thanking you for the wonderful webinar, by the way. That's wonderful. I'm sorry I have to take the screen back and show my screen instead and my goodbye slides. Let's see if you can see them now. And I want to thank you for joining us today. Also, I want to remind everybody to visit our webpage at novedge.com, where you can find KeyShot 7. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. But anyway, and next webinar will be about Vectorworks Spotlight 2018. And because many of you asked me today to rewatch today's webinar, you can go to YouTube and look for the Novedge channel, and I'll post it on our webinar series channel as early as this afternoon, because a lot of people were like, "Oh, we want to see it again. We want to see more," and we have to leave, so we want to make everybody happy, and so they can share it with their colleagues or with their team. Thanks again for joining us today, and especially thank you, Will. It was a wonderful presentation, very entertaining, and looking forward to more.
The honor was mine. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Likewise. Bye.